Good evening all and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Well, it's been an interesting couple of weeks of development from the European Parliament. Obviously Theresa May is going over there talking about divorce bills and various other things to do with our exit from the European Union. Well, we all know that the EU are going to make it as difficult as possible. They don't want to negotiate, so just leave. Simple as that. WTO rules, hurts them more than it hurts us. We've got the power. We turn around and say how we're going to do it. Let's face it, £60 billion a year trade deficit with the European Union. Who's it going to hurt more? Especially when we're trading with 180 countries across the world, and all this scaremongering about the price of your food will go up. Funnily enough, actually, according to a report from the EEAS, it will actually go down, because straight away we can remove the EU's common tariff barrier and we can import food from the rest of the world like we used to do before. Remember New Zealand lamb? Yeah, I know, that's a lot cheaper in the US. Funny that. And there's 180 countries around the world. 7 out of the 10 biggest exporters to the European Union don't even have a trade deal. And we've got them queuing up to do deals with us. So it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. We hold all the aces, Theresa, as I've said before. You don't fold with a winning hand. But while this is all going on, there's something else that's happening in the European Parliament, and there's a meeting at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And funnily enough, the press haven't picked up on it. And you've probably not heard of it. It's called Pesco. That's the Permanent Structured Cooperation sheet. And this is to do with what Nick Clegg once called a dangerous fantasy. Yes, that's it, the EU army. So they've already had votes in the European Parliament and they've talked about allocating money to defence, which strikes me as odd because NATO's kept the peace in Europe since World War II, and a lot of the EU member states don't keep to the minimum spending limits to be a member of NATO, and it's the Americans who put the most money in, and there's only us and a couple of the EU states who actually meet our spending commitments. Funny that, isn't it? It's us Brits playing by the rules again. But I've got in front of me, on my screen at the moment, it's the website of the European Union External Action Group, and it's got the fact sheet about Pesco. And the top of it is titled Deepening Defence Cooperation Among EU Member States. Remember that, Nick Clegg? Your dangerous fantasy again. Towards more security for the EU and its citizens. So, the EU Global Strategy for Foreign and Security Policy started a process of closer cooperation in security and defence. Member States agreed to step up the European Union's work in this area and acknowledge that enhanced coordination, increased investment in defence and cooperation in developing defence capabilities are key requirements to achieve it. This is the main aim of a Permanent Structured Cooperation on Security and Defence, PESCO, as outlined in the Treaty of the EU Articles 42 (6) and 46, as well as Protocol 10. Through PESCO, Member States increase their effectiveness in addressing security challenges and advancing towards further integrating and strengthening defence cooperation within the EU framework. And this is a quote on there from Frederica Mogherini. You might not have heard of her. She's a big shot in Brussels. And she says, within 1 year after we started to prepare it, we're about to launch with PESCO, an inclusive framework to facilitate the joint investments and projects that we so much need to strengthen the ability of the European Union to be a credible security provider for its citizens and globally. And going further down, it states, the difference between PESCO and other forms of cooperation is the binding nature of the commitments undertaken by participating member states. However, it says, participation remains voluntary and decision-making will remain in the hands of participating member states. How many times have you heard that before? PESCO will have a two-layer structure. Council level, responsible for the overall policy direction and assessment mechanism to determine if member states are fulfilling their commitments. Only Pesco members are voting. Decisions are taken by unanimity, except decisions regarding the suspension of membership and entry of new members, which are taken by qualified majority, QMV. Projects level. Pesco's effectiveness will be measured by the projects it will develop. Each project will be managed by those member states that contribute to it. Well, I've got a few worries here. Step 3 on here as well, it says, following the notification, a council decision establishing Pesco to be adopted by qualified majority before the end of 2017. So effectively, you've got deepening cooperation, you've got EU interference in defence, and you will have to be more involved with other EU member states. We know there's already been certain transfers where different battle groups from different countries have cooperated, but it hasn't been done under the NATO umbrella, it's been done under the EU umbrella. So what they're doing is they are duplicating NATO without the financial muscle and the firepower of the US, but effectively this will be under the auspices of the European Union. Now, we're leaving the European Union, you say, so why will this affect us? Well, basically because, under the table, our government has already signed up to Pesco. So we can leave the European Union, but we are already committed to working inside the umbrella of Pesco, which means that British forces will be at the beck and call of the European Union. Why is that such a bad thing? Well, look at what they've done before. All the uprising in Ukraine that everybody got very upset with the Soviet Union about, the initial uprising, they were waving EU flags, and it turns out that there was European Union money pumped in to destabilise the area. So if we're involved in Pesco, the EU get a little bit above themselves and decide that they're going to poke the Russian bear again, that will mean that despite us being outside the European Union, British troops could be committed under the command of European member state control to a war that our Parliament would not vote on. This is very, very serious. Why has this not got into the national press? Why has this not had more high profile? I am very concerned about this, and so are a lot of people. There are petitions going around about it. Write to your MP, ask them about the implications of Pesco. Go onto the website that shows you what's going on. That's the European Union External Action website. That's www.eeas.europa.eu. Have a look on there and see what's proposed. Nick Clegg's dangerous fantasy is becoming an extremely dangerous reality, and our leaving the EU will not stop it unless we tell our government it stops now. We're pulling out of the European Union. We are leaving. We do not need military cooperation with the EU. We have NATO. We have our Commonwealth allies. We're also part of the Five Eyes Alliance, which is very much in the forefront of the fight against terror. And the more we're integrated with the EU, some of the other members of the Five Eyes Alliance, including the US, aren't too keen on sharing information because you never know who it's going to end up with if you've got integration with certain other EU member states who maybe aren't quite as on side as we are. So, as I say, look it up. It's scary. They're voting on it at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning in the European Parliament. I know it's short notice. Get onto your MP, get onto your MEP. This cannot be allowed to happen. Good night.